Hi, this is Senator Malcolm Roberts, live from Brisbane. And I've just landed back in Brisbane, flew up from Canberra and caught a cab. I'm in my office and I'm just doing live stream. So I regret being late, but better late than never, I suppose. And it's the schedule. So I want to talk about a few things and then we'll answer some questions. So I'll be looking down at the screen, see comments coming through. First thing I want to discuss is the listening tour that's been going, that I started last week, going around Queensland. It'll be continuing in the next couple of months. We went from Brisbane, I'll have to remember the places. A couple of weeks ago I was in Rocky, but we did two things in Rocky. We had a listening session at a climate forum, and we also had then in the afternoon a pro-life demonstration through the streets of Rocky and spoke there. And then last week, which day would it be? We left on the Thursday evening to get to Gympie and stayed overnight in Gympie. What a beautiful city that is. Really friendly people. And then the next morning we checked into the Property Rights Australia conference, and it's really important. And we talked a bit about that last week, so I won't bring you up to date with that. But it's wonderful. It really was a wonderful conference. So it gets back to basics. Then we went from Gympie that was all day and evening, and then we went to Hervey Bay the next morning and had a really wonderful forum listening to people about the crime in Hervey Bay. And when I say wonderful, it's not good listening to people about the crime, but I can't remember if I gave people an update. I don't think I did, but we met a family of a nurse who died in an horrific car accident a couple of months ago, a really shocking accident. And the family were just awesome, just inspiring. We expressed our condolences to them, but even more, we expressed our gratitude to them and our appreciation and our admiration for them. I'll tell you what happened. We had about 200 or possibly more people from Hervey Bay. And by the way, at these functions, we've had people who've driven for a couple of hours, 100 kilometres or more, and just to take part. So at Hervey Bay, a couple of months ago, we had a nurse just coming off night shift. I used to call it dog watching when I was working underground at the coalface. But anyway, she was on night shift. Lovely nurse, life of the party, good nature, good humour, and just always telling jokes and keeping people happy. Patients and staff loved her. Anyway, she was driving home from work, and coming in the opposite direction was a car with 3 people in it. And then behind them was a youth who'd hijacked a car. No, stolen's the right word. Stolen a car. And he was driving somewhere between 150, 170 kilometres an hour. Slammed into the back of the car with the 3 people in it. Pushed that car into the oncoming car from Charisse. And Charisse died on the scene a couple of hours later with a nurse who was following her, just come off shift together. And so that nurse stayed there with her. 2 people in the car that was pushed into Charisse's car died. A third person is still, as far as we know, still in intensive care or still in Brisbane Hospital. And the 13-year-old who caused it all has slightly injured 1 foot. That's the youth crime. Well, what was so impressive, it was really heartwarming as a fellow human to watch. Lisa, Charisse's sister, and these nurses are in their 50s, so beautiful people. Lisa had her daughter there, who's also had her son there, son who was in a pram, very young. But anyway, Lisa was speaking about the pain she felt losing Charisse, her sister, and she started then thinking about the perpetrator, the person who killed her sister. And you could see her pause, and I was only very close right beside her, and I could see her pause. Then she was going through her mind, what do I say next? She wanted to unload, I think, on this 13-year-old youth, but she just switched and just had compassion for him. And it turned the whole event. It was just a beautiful thing to see one human do that. Then Sharice's brother Glenn stood up, and he told he expressed his views and feelings, and his sadness and grief, and he was the same. He had compassion for this 13-year-old, because he realised what had caused it all. And then Jeanette, Sharice's mother, spoke. And all three of them, just stunning speakers. They didn't think they could do it, but they not only did it, they did it marvellously. They're highly, highly effective. And then they set the tone for the whole afternoon. And we were there a couple of hours. And people didn't stop talking, people from the audience. And, they identified, they pinpointed the causes. And I said causes. It's not just a delinquent 13-year-old youth. It's the way that children are being raised today. It's woke premiers like Premier Palaszczuk, woke prime ministers, woke governments who won't address the real issues, police who are confronted by judges who give them a catch and release. They catch criminals, catch young kids, and they just have to release them. The society is so broken at the moment, and it has been for some time. Society generally around the country, and many Western countries, is so broken that kids don't have parents anymore. Two people actually said part of the cause for increased crime is the injection mandates, the COVID injection mandates, because people would not allow a government or an employer to inject them with something that wasn't tested, and they demanded their right to determine what goes into their body. And rather than be injected, they took the sack or resigned or just plain weren't allowed at work. And they needed money, so they've turned to crime. And you can see that. Most people respect other people's property, respect other people's bodies, but they have to survive. We've got, and people agreed right through. There were foster parents who spoke. I remember one beautiful woman. She spoke very, very much about how much she enjoyed being a foster parent, but the difficulties, not from the children, from the bureaucrats. And there were parents from all kinds of backgrounds there, loving community, and they realised it was the community that was that had the problems, not just one or two parents. And so the taxation system makes it so that two people have to go to work, two parents have to go to work these days. And I asked people in the audience if they were raised with one or two parents at home. And most of the people who were in their 60s, one parent at home. People younger, no parents at home. And so kids are being raised by drag queens. Kids are being raised by woke teachers who are pushing UN bullshit through them. World Economic Forum crap that's dismembering kids to them. So it was just so wonderful to see everyone there realize it wasn't that 13-year-old, it was society. Then we went to Monto. The next day we stayed in Harvey Bay that night. What a beautiful place Harvey Bay is. Then we went to Monto, drove inland to Monto, rural town. We had people come there into the pub, the Edward Hotel. And thank you again for the Edward Hotel, to the Edward Hotel. Wonderful discussion there about all kinds of things that are affecting people today, that interest people today. And then that night we drove to Gin, a different community entirely, and the place was packed. We stayed at the Highway. We had the forum at the Highway Hotel on the Pacific Highway, the Bruce Highway, sorry, and that was packed. It had about 100 people there. It was well and truly packed. Wonderful contributions from the audience. And we stayed that night in Gin, and then went to Bundy the next day. Had a walk around downtown. What a beautiful, beautiful city. It's not a little city anymore. And then flew straight to Canberra. Had Parliament. I've just flown back to Brisbane. Have overnighted home, and then go to Bribie Island tomorrow for a crime forum. Do an interview tomorrow night, and then Sunday see our grandson, and then go back to Canberra. And then the following Thursday, We go from Canberra back to Bundy, pick up the car. It's parked in Bundy at the moment. And then we continue for the next for 6 weeks or so. So, what apart from the impressive family at Harvey Bay, it was wonderful to see the interest of people and the deep concern that people have for our country. So, issues like crime, issues like immigration. Why are we bringing in a whole lot of people when we haven't got the housing? The voice is a big concern for many people, and I'll bring you up to date on that. Housing, as I said. And one of the things that people are really pissed off about is the woke governance. And the cause of all these things, I make the point as I go around the country that the biggest problem we have in this country is Federal Parliament House. Every major problem that people raise with me has its roots in Parliament House. It came from Parliament House, either directly or indirectly through state governments. And that's our problem, Parliament House, the Parliament. These members of the Liberal and Labor Party, and only a couple or a small group in each party calls the shots. The Nationals just follow the Liberals meekly. The Greens are driving the Labor Party because, as I've said before, in this current Parliament, the Labor Party has under 1/3 of the vote in the lower house, the House of Representatives. And they form the government with less than 1/3 of the vote. And the Liberal Nationals had about 1/3 of the vote, just a little bit over. And that means 1/3 didn't vote for either of the two tight old parties, and only 1/3 of the people voted for the current government. In the Senate, it's a different matter. Labor cannot have a majority on its own, does not have a majority on its own. When you add the Greens, then you get an even house. And so if the Labor Party is putting any bills in, it can't pass it with just the Greens and the Labor Party because you have to have an absolute majority to pass something. So that means invariably the Teal senator, David Pocock, and he's a Teal, make no mistake. He's a Teal. He's funded by Climate 200, which are funding the Teals. And so what they're doing is that's how they get things through the upper house, the Senate. Pocock gets what he wants. Labor Party gets him, well and truly gets him. He runs with the Greens, and the Greens used to be somewhat in favour of exposing governments of either kind. But now that they're in bed with the government, they don't do orders for production of they don't support orders for the production of documents so much now. So they oppose it, and with the Greens and with Labor and Pocock together, they guillotine debate. They suppress references to inquiry. They suppress orders for production of documents. So when we ask the government for documents, so that's what's going on. And you can thank David Pocock in particular, but also the Greens. They're working very, very closely with the Labor Party. And that's what pushes the World Economic Forum and UN alliance policies through. And it's all based on fear. But some wonderful news, really, really wonderful news. The Club of Rome in the 1960s was pushing this lie about the population Armageddon that was going to face us, that we were facing. Population Armageddon, we'd be destroyed by 15 billion of us humans walking the earth, irresponsible, greedy, rapacious, fearful, destructive, and not giving a damn. These humans, $15 billion it would rise to. Well, guess what? They've had a revised forecast. We're currently at about 8 billion people. There are two scenarios. One scenario is that the population will rise to a maximum of 8.7 million and then fall to about 7. The other scenario is that the population will rise from here to about 8.3 billion and then it will fall to 6 billion. As one of my staff said today, that's without Bill Gates injecting anyone else. That's assuming Bill Gates doesn't inject anyone. But fall to 6 billion. Now, I've always known that humans have a wonderful heart. Sure, not every human is perfect, but and some have done enormously detrimental crimes against humanity. But the point is that the UN, the World Economic Forum, the Club of Rome say that humans just have a mouth and a belly. That's it. We're just greedy, rapacious, resource-guzzling, food-guzzling bellies and mouths. That's all we are. But every human mouth comes with a brain and an even more impressive heart. And there's no brain like a human brain, no heart like a human heart. We're connected to each other, we're connected to the universe. And so they've forgotten about that. They've forgotten entirely about that. But anyway, their fear that we'll hit 15 billion people and swamp the planet, that's been underpinning all their catastrophes. And I've got some notes that I made in the plane coming up on my phone. They use invisible fears. And think about the invisible fears they've used to suppress humans, to convince people. COVID, invisible. And it wasn't anything more serious than a flu. A lot of lies were told. COVID, fear, fear, fear. Climate fraud, invisible. Fear, fear, fear. Population time bomb, apocalyptic time bomb, invisible. Fear, fear, fear. Money. Senator Ron Paul from the United States Congress wrote this book, End the Fed, Ron Paul. I've discussed that in the past. I want to just discuss, and a wonderful book, very easy, my sort of book, short and simple, like me. He's written this book, and he said that it all goes back to 1907. And 1907, there was a major collapse, economic collapse in the United States. And what happened was the banks flooded the joint with money, and then they quickly tightened up. Once everyone was overcommitted and borrowed too much, they tightened up and strangled farmers, called in properties, they foreclosed. And that's how they transfer wealth. That's why we call them money creators and asset strippers. Money creators and asset strippers. That's the major banks. And they work on the same principle here in Australia, now for Big Four, who are owned by some of the major global banks. So that's how they manipulate money. They lower interest rates, suck people in, overcommitted people because money's cheap, and then they tighten it up quickly, raise interest rates, and people foreclose, and that's how they get their assets. And then what happens when you've got that basic fear going on, and this is important, this you can see, and we'll talk more about it in future if you want. This we can see in so many ways. They then extend it to the need for some global control. So they look at it nationally, then they look at it globally. And of course, the United Nations World Health Organization is coming up with a treaty, which we can stop, providing people are on the game with the members of parliament. We can stop that damn treaty because we just have to put pressure on the federal members of parliament to reject it. Just like we defeated the cash ban bill. My office alone defeated the cash ban bill because we got in touch with the Liberal Party and Labor Party grassroots members who put pressure on Liberal Party and Labor Party members of parliament. Then the United Nations, for example, says that we need a carbon dioxide tax because the carbon dioxide you and I are exhaling here is going to affect someone in Peru, Bolivia, Samoa, Japan, China, India, all around the world. So we need a global solution, they say. It was complete bullshit, but that's what they tell us. And that's why they almost got a carbon dioxide tax in globally, except for Senator James Inhofe at the last minute woke up and turned the whole of the US Senate around, turned it around, opposing the United Nations carbon dioxide tax and emissions trading scheme. And our dopey bastards, Greg Hunt and Malcolm Turnbull, passed the provision that enables a carbon dioxide emissions trading scheme, a tax, in this country in 2015, just before Christmas. And the Labor Party has now picked it up and called it the safeguard mechanism. And that is adding costs to anybody who uses coal-fired electricity. And it's complete rubbish, but that's what they're doing. It's a tax. It's a tax, a tax, a tax. And then we've got food. Because they say that population time bomb is happening, or was happening, they need to control the food. So again, they're trying to force bugs on us to eat instead of meat. They want to form lab-grown, or what I think they call them, food reactors, producing cancerous slop instead of meat, and then calling it red meat. Grown in a lab, grown in a test tube, grown in vitro. All lies. And now the Club of Rome has admitted that its population forecasts are not catastrophic at all. We'll end up with less people than we have now. We'll end up with about 3/4 of the people we have now if their forecasts are correct. And that's what most sane people have been saying for quite a while. All of this fear this control is made possible only through a handful of Liberal Labor MPs who ram laws through Parliament House that are basically implementing UN and World Economic Forum policies brought here by the Greens. There's more hope, though. Not only the Club of Rome revising its forecast for population down, you should have felt what I felt in the room at Gympie with the Property Rights of Australia forum going on. The farmers, man, are they upset. And local communities, regional communities, they're upset because people have been telling us, the governments have been telling us, state and federal, Palaszczuk, Morrison, Albanese, we need lots of solar panels out in the bush, carpeting everything in shiny glass, destroying prime agricultural land. We need lots of wind turbines, smashing rainforests, smashing birds, destroying people's health through the infrasound. And what they forgot was you need power lines. And whereas you have one power station, coal-fired power station, with a massive capacity for building concentrated power, generating concentrated power, and then one set of transmission lines. Now with solar panels and wind turbines scattered all over the place, and mainly in the regions because they haven't got the land around the cities, you need so many transmission lines that's just going to crisscross the whole countryside and destroy farms, destroy rainforests, destroy national parks. So what we've got is a need for restraint on there. We've got a lot of solar panels and wind turbines, not even connected, still being paid as if they're generating electricity because they are, but it's just going to ground because they're not connected to the grid. Now they've got to build all these power lines rather. What the hell are people building this kind of investment with your money, our money, and not even hooking it up to the grid? And yet the costs continue. And then we met some wonderful Victorian farmers who'd come up to see the debate on referring transmission lines for solar and wind. I almost called it renewable. I'll talk about that in a minute. Transmission lines for solar and wind in Victoria. And they're smashing up farms and not even listening to people, just running roughshod over their property rights. And the Liberal, National and One Nation parties supported the referral of these transmission lines and solar and wind to a Senate inquiry to inquire into it. Why they're needing so much land, why they're just running roughshod over farmers. David Pocock opposed the inquiry. Opposed it. The Greens oppose it. Greens should be all in favour of looking after national parks, but they're worried because the mood in the public is turning savagely, especially in regional communities devastated by these solar panels and wind turbines. The mood in the public is turning to negative on solar panels and wind turbines. So what we see now is, I remember commissioning a study by noted economist Alan Moran, Dr. Alan Moran. He calls solar and wind a parasitic malinvestment. They're an economic parasite, a social parasite, a moral parasite, a security parasite. They're destroying security. They're an environmental parasite. And they stop human progress because the fundamental thing for human progress is ever decreasing prices of energy, which has happened since the Industrial Revolution, and coal and oil and natural gas. And so what's happened now is that we've gone backwards because solar and wind raise the price of electricity, make them not regular, not reliable, and so you have a destructive force on the economy. That's why they're parasitic. They're destroying our economy, and they're destroying human progress. So, people don't know this, but the best friend of the whales on planet Earth is coal. The best friend of timber forests in the world is coal. Thanks to coal, we're no longer burning wood in our stoves and our fireplaces to keep warm. And we're no longer polluting the sky with particulates from wood fires like London used to be, like all major industrial towns used to be 100 years ago. We've now got cleaner, healthier air. And so we've now got 30% more forests in the developed continents than before, than 100 years ago. 30% more forest. Look at the whales. Whales are now thriving, whereas they were threatened with extinction. So that's the importance of hydrocarbon fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, and getting rid of these solar and wind parasitic malinvestments. They're malinvestments because for every job they create, supposedly, they destroy 2.2, 2.3 jobs in the real economy because they're expensive and they drive up the cost of electricity. I wanted to talk about renewables just briefly too, because I was really amazed and very pleasantly surprised at the level of the ferocity against these solar and wind turbines, because people can now see how damaging they are to the environment. And they're all based on a lie, so they're damaging morally as well. But they're called renewable. I don't know why. Well, then I worked out why. Because they only last 8 to 12 years, and they drop off in their efficiency on solar panels after about 8 to 10 years. But the solar panels and wind turbines that we will need if we keep destroying coal-fired power in this country for the 2050, they will be replaced 4 times. They won't be the same solar panels and wind turbines now. They only last anywhere from 8 to 12 years. So that means by the time 2050 comes around, the solar panels and wind turbines will be replaced 4 times. We'll be on our 4th set. That's why they're called renewable, because you have to keep renewing the mongrel things. And they're also, a fact is that they can't be recycled because it costs too much in the way of energy and too much in the way of money to recycle them. It's just not worth it. So they bury these things, and there's no bond on the bloody things, because with a coal mine, on a surface coal mine, every acre, every hectare of land that they disturb, and they take topsoil off and stockpile it, then they take off the stone, the rock, and then they take out the coal, then they bury the stone back in over the coal, and then put the topsoil back, and they usually have better pasture or better bush than before, because the quality is so much higher. The reclamation quality is so much higher. Then every hectare they uncover in a year, they have to put a bond in, and it's a very, very big sum of money. And then once they get it back to reclaimed land and beautiful environment again, they get the money back. It's a bond, just like a bond in a rental house. Solar and wind, no bond. Farmers are going to be left to pick up the pieces, rusting steel from wind turbines, massive concrete bollards from wind turbines, rusty, toxic pollution from glass and lead in the solar panels. They'll be just left there. There's no bond. So no one's made any provision for that. This is what's going to destroy our environment more so than anything else. So what was I going to go to next? The Voice. The Voice that is currently being debated. I got in early, fortunately, so all they're doing in Canberra now, they're not having any votes on anything meaningful. That's why I was able to leave early with a clear conscience to meet a commitment tonight in Brisbane that had been made months ago. And The Voice, they're continuing the debates, and then the crucial vote will be on Monday, so I'll be back for that. You know, one of the things that happened in the last couple of weeks of Parliament, the previous session and this session, is Pauline has tried to get, and she's tried so damn hard, she's tried to get people to realise that there's identity fraud going on with regard to Aboriginal descendants. The percentage, I can't remember the figures, they're staggering figures. The percentage of people who are Aboriginal in the census 20 years ago was fairly small. That percentage now is huge, because people are collecting the money on welfare that goes to people of Aboriginal descent. And that fraud is acknowledged. And Pauline's doing this not only for protecting the taxpayers' funds, but especially for the Aboriginals, because the Aboriginals are offended that people who are not Aboriginals are claiming to be Aboriginal. And that's just not right. So people should be proud of their background, their heritage, and Aboriginals are, rightly so. I mean, look at the National Rugby League. Look at the Australian AFL football. They've got a high proportion of Aboriginal people playing and Islanders playing, because they're very talented. You've got people like Nampa Jimpa Price in federal parliament, Karen Little in federal parliament, people like Warren Mundine in the business side of things, and so many more people. Ash up at Collinsville, wanting to put in the power station in Collinsville. Steve Fordham down in the Hunter Valley doing amazing work with rehabilitating people who go to prison, and having a huge success rate. I think a 97% success rate. So, in turning around these people's lives, just by working on the basics, getting back to basics. And so it's very important that only Aboriginals should be able to claim Aboriginal descendants. Now, Pauline's tried to introduce a bill requiring proof and consult. There are so many definitions of what is or is not an Aboriginal, and people are taking advantage of that mess, that confusion. Pauline raised it. Now, this is now 3 times. The Labor government, and she raised it 4 times, in a question time as well, was the 4th time. Labor government twice denied there's identity fraud going on. Everyone knows there is. So that's pending a vote next week on the Voice, but the Aboriginal descendancy, that will continue. The definition of what makes an Aboriginal will continue. The quest will continue. And politics has got very dirty and very personal this week. We had Katie Gallagher. And a lot of questions, I discussed that last week, I think. A lot of questions, we might give a summary next week. A lot of questions about, was the payment to Brittany Higgins a reward, a payoff for bringing down the Morrison government? Because to get a settlement, you have to submit a court claim, a claim into court. That's never been done. Brittany Higgins has never done that, reportedly, never done that. So then the second hurdle is you only settle, if you're the government, if it looks like you'll lose the case. Well, there's no case. There's no claim. So why is the government settling? Then normally such settlements take mediation, and that mediation involves the employers. Brittany Higgins had 2 employers, Senator Linda Reynolds and Senator Michaelia Cash. Not only were they not invited to the mediation, they were squeezed out of the mediation by the Labor government. They didn't want them talking there. So, and then normally it takes a period of 6 weeks to go through mediation, at least. This wasn't a claim. This case was settled in 1 day. You can see now why there are so many questions being asked, but it's starting to get it's continuing to get really nasty. Then we had Lydia Thorpe, who made a claim, then withdrew it, and then continued to speak disparagingly about someone. And I'm not saying whether David Van is guilty or not. I don't know. The best place to settle that is in a court. Give it to the police and let them sort it out. Instead, we had Lydia Thorpe making all kinds of claims and David Van unable to defend himself. Whether he's guilty or not doesn't matter. People should be given justice. That's what our society stands on. And Lydia Thorpe making claims about how she feels so scared in Parliament House. I've never heard a woman talking about being scared in Parliament House. Never. And I'm sure there's pressure because it's a place that's run by power rather than objectivity. So I can understand that kind of environment, but it's not rife. As Pauline said when Lydia finished, she said, in her view, that Lydia Thorpe was the most threatening person in the whole of the Senate. And abusive, certainly the most abusive. Now, Pauline and I don't feel threatened by Lydia Thorpe calling us names, but is that the way we want to run a Senate? And then Pauline said that to her because they sit right near each other, and then Lydia Thorpe gave her a mouthful of abuse back, including the F word. There you go. David Van, the papers, I don't know any more than the papers have told us. But we need to get back to governing. We need to get back to governing and put all this stuff aside, resolve it, and get on with it. And then we saw the Calvary Hospital. David Pocock, again, in my opinion, got it wrong, completely wrong. Calvary Hospital is a Catholic hospital, and Catholic hospitals have been in existence since, I think, 1885. They've treated millions of people with wonderful care all the way through. Some cases, those people wouldn't have got the care if it hadn't been for the Catholic and other churches running hospitals. Calvary Hospital is in the Australian Capital Territory. The Australian Capital Territory government has decided, without consultation, it will take over, it will steal the Calvary Hospital. Take it over. 1,800 employees. Not one has had a discussion with what's going on with the ACT government. And David Pocock stands up and says he will write. He has written to the Australian Capital Territory government, asking them to have an inquiry. How the hell are you going to get objectivity from a government that's stealing property? You expect them to have an objective inquiry? Of course not. That's bloody ridiculous. He's just, in my opinion, he's just covering up for his mates in the Australian Capital Territory government, the Labor government in the Australian Capital Territory. We need an objective, fair dinkum inquiry, and the Senate would be the ideal place to do that. The Senate has got no axe to grind. All it does is hears the evidence from many submissions, hears witnesses, and then gets on with making its recommendations. No power. Senate has got no power to be involved, but has got political clout and pushing the government and the federal government to do something about it. But the federal government is just sitting still. So as I said, the government in the Senate, your government, our government, is Labor, Greens, Teal, Pocock. And then the Creative Australia bill came through. What a mess. Tony Burke wants to give $286 million to artists in Australia. Now that sounds good. But what they do is they give it to artists who are pushing an ideological agenda, a left-wing control side of politics, pushing World Economic Forum and UN ideologies, rather than celebrating and glorifying and appreciating the Western civilization and what it's given us, rather than appreciating our early painters or people who are painting still about our rural scenes or our city scenes, our beach scenes, or our pioneers. You know, the more you give grants, the more you get people dependent on the government. And then one of my staff pointed out this. There was a scene in Melbourne outside the art gallery. There was Renaissance masters were on display, the really good paintings from a century and a bit ago. And more than a century a bit, 150, 200 years. And no, Renaissance, hang on, that's a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, 1,000 years ago. So there was a long queue lined up to get in to see these paintings from Europe. And beside the gallery was a live art exhibition with people pretending to be sheep and baaing, just absolute bullshit. And you know what the Creative Australia would be funding, don't you? That's about all I've got for now. I've got other things, but I'd like to get over to some questions. If you've got questions, we'll just set the notes aside. So welcome to get any questions you want. I want to know, Deb says, I want to know what is with all the tyrannical politicians resigning suddenly. Heard Andrews may be resigning. There is something sus going on. Something sus going on. Something sus has been going on for 3 years, definitely within the public domain, Deb, as you know, because of their tyranny. And something sus has been going on with the formation of APRA since 2008, with what's been happening with the UN and World Health Organization and those criminals in the World Health Organization. Something sus has been going on for a long, long time. We've seen Greg Hunt leave, the former health minister who presided over the dishonest, deceitful mismanagement of COVID. And Greg Hunt, by the way, is the one who was pushing the safeguard mechanism that was basically the foundations for a carbon dioxide tax and emissions trading scheme. So he's got a lot to answer for. We'll chase these people. We'll get justice. We've got, who else is Andrew? McGowan is gone. The head of the TGA has gone. The Secretary of the Federal Health Department, he's given his notice, so he'll be resigning. I don't know what's going on, but I think that they're starting to feel the heat as the facts come out, and that we suddenly realise, as the head of the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which provisionally approved the injections, as he said to me, Professor John Skerritt answered my question in Senate estimates, and he admitted that contrary to what people had said before and what people have believed before, the TGA never tested these Pfizer injections. Not only that, they didn't even look at the patient-level data in Pfizer's trials. Didn't even look at it. You know why? Because they didn't even have it. They didn't have it. And then he said, because the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in America, has a budget of $8 billion and 15,000 employees, they rely upon the FDA. The FDA had already said that they did not do the patient level. They did not assess the patient level data either. They relied upon Pfizer. And we now know, thanks to some wonderful work by a group of scientists and doctors who are now studying the Pfizer data properly, that Pfizer didn't take note of some blatant warning signals that were going on. These injections are deadly. And we now know that the injections did not comply with good manufacturing processes. So some batches, we think of the vaccines, are just like saline, harmless. Other batches are deadly. We see the deaths concentrated in just a few batches. So, but we now know that the excess deaths since the injection, there were never any excess deaths during COVID, none at all. The deaths were just normal variation from year to year. Since the COVID injections were introduced, we've had a huge increase in excess deaths, running at around about 35,000 or more. It's probably slightly more than that, or even well more than that, 35,000 a year. That's equivalent, I think I've said it before, that's equivalent of 2 Boeing 787 Dreamliner jets, wide-body jets, crashing every week. And everyone's saying, oh, not interested. Every week for a year, you'd have 35,000 deaths. Imagine that. One Boeing goes down, they're all over the place having an inquiry. 2 go down in a week, all over the place. 2 go down every week for a year, and no one wants to do anything. No one cares, despite us raising hell in the Senate estimates and in the Senate. So I don't know about that, about why the tyrants are resigning. Can we stop the immigrants they're bringing in? Well, Viv, that's a question from Viv. We can't stop it now because the voters of Australia elected a government. Less than 1/3 of the voters elected the Labor government. They've been charged with, under our constitution, with governing for 3 years. That's it. We're stuck. But we can stop the immigrants by changing the government and getting more One Nation senators and more One Nation members of Parliament into the lower house. Because if we get enough One Nation members of Parliament, we'll have the balance of power and we'll be able to stop them bringing in this ridiculous immigration. One Nation's policy is to have net zero immigration. Nothing to do with the net zero climate bullshit, net zero immigration. What that means is that every year we have about 70,000 or so people leave Australia. We will let in only 70,000 to replace what's gone until we get our until we get our infrastructure caught up, our services caught up, our housing caught up. And that's a major part of our housing policy as well. We have got to cut this immigration because that's the number one driver of house prices and rental prices. So Andy's workshop asks, will vaping become properly regulated? That's what we're pushing for. Pauline and I have been taking in turns to really push medicinal cannabis and vaping. Medicinal cannabis separately from vaping, but both those issues. The TGA has been thwarting us on medicinal cannabis. Medicinal cannabis is proven. There's only one thing wrong with medicinal cannabis. You can't overdose on it, but there's only one thing wrong, and that is that Big Pharma doesn't make money out of it. So that's why they want to keep medicinal cannabis away, because it is highly successful for many, many conditions. So vaping is the same thing. We want that properly regulated because then it's much, much safer. And vaping, I'm against smoking. I've never had a smoke between my lips, never. And I don't intend to ever do it. But vaping leads to people with nicotine dependency eventually quitting. There's a very high rate of people quitting smoking with vaping. So vaping is not harmful. It's providing it's regulated. So yes, vaping, we believe, will become regulated. There's more and more pressure. More and more people are waking up in the Senate. More and more people are waking up in the Senate and in the House of Representatives to the benefits of medicinal cannabis. I've brought those two together because they're similar issues, but medicinal cannabis will be coming. And right now, we've exposed the fact, and the health bureaucrats don't like it. Thanks, Andy. You're saying it enabled you to quit smoking 2 years ago. That's the case overwhelmingly in Britain, where they've got all the data. By the way, medicinal cannabis, the health minister can regulate it from Schedule 8, which is classifying it as a toxin, down to Schedule 4, which means it can be done on prescription. So medicinal cannabis, as opposed to recreational cannabis, is wonderfully positive, and we need to get that made available right across the country. It's wherever it's been used overseas, and it's used in quite a few countries now. It's been remarkably successful. We're not saying no to recreational cannabis. We're just saying let's just make sure people are comfortable with medicinal cannabis first and then assess the data on recreational. We're not saying no. We're just saying at the moment, leave recreational out because so many people are opposed to it. We understand that. There are a lot of things, anxieties about that, whether that's true or ignorance, it doesn't matter. That's the way people are feeling. If you put medicinal and cannabis and recreational cannabis together, you'll get a rejection of medicinal cannabis. That's why we have been very strong in separating the two and putting medicinal cannabis out on its own. Tony, why did Higgins get a compensation payment on an allegations when VACC, vax injuries, have to jump through hoops on fire and 18 months later still waiting? Bloody good question, mate. I'll tell you why I think it's the case. Because Higgins has got they've obviously got somebody in the government very, very sympathetic because they bypassed all the normal requirements for treating this properly. Did you know that Linda Reynolds and Michaelia Cash were told by the Attorney General that they wouldn't get their lawyers' fees paid for, their court fees paid for, if they appeared in the trial of Bruce Lerman? I mean, that's what got me interested in this. I thought let the court procedures continue, and someone will either be found, Bruce Lerman will either be found guilty or not guilty. So I wasn't interested. That's just the way justice should work. And then I found out that the Attorney General was not following convention and would not give Linda Reynolds and Michaelia Cash the funds to pay for their court costs if they appeared in court. That's blackmail to me. That's when I got interested in what was going on, because I thought that's a huge black mark for Australia. That's a huge black mark for the chief law officer in the country, the Attorney General. And so I walked up to Linda Reynolds one day in the Senate and said, "Is this true what the media is saying?" She said, "Yep." Check with Michaelia. So I went over to Michaelia Cash, and I'm no mates with these people. And I said, "Michaelia, is that true?" And she said, "Yes." That's when I started asking questions in Senate estimates. That's when I got onto Sky News and asked the real question: is Brittany Higgins' payment that the Labor government is making without any due process, is it a payoff for helping bring down the Morrison government? PJS asked, "Do you think the Voice will get through?" No. And one of the staff I have in my team, I've got a wonderful staff team. He said a long time ago that right from when at first they started doing the polls, that even though the support for the polls showed a support for the referendum, the yes vote, he pointed out that it was too low to be sustained, and already we've seen it dipping, and it's gone now below 50% supporting the Voice. We now know that 3 states are already against it, and there'll be more coming against it. So for the Voice to get up, it needs a majority of people in a majority of states. That means it needs 4 states. The territories don't count. And it needs a majority around the whole country. Well, we've now got 3 states. Wow, I've just got some good news, which I might share later. Wonderful news, something we've been pushing for a long time in the Senate. So we now know there are 3 states opposed to the Voice. That means straight away, right now, it's buggered. It will fail. It won't get through. Because you need a majority of states. That means you need 4 states with a majority in each of those 4 states to get through. So it's already buggered. What's happening, though, is there's a clear trend of the vote declining. Because the closer you get to the referendum date, the less likely people are to support a referendum. The Constitution is fundamental. It's our governing document. It's the governing instrument for our country. And people know that, and they're very reluctant to give any government the change in constitution because they don't trust them, and rightly so. This voice is a real abomination. It's horrific. It's very, very scary in so many ways. There's so much deceit about it. But you ask me, do I think the voice will get through? I don't think it will get through at all. I think it's doomed to defeat. But here's the thing. Anthony Albanese recently acknowledged the decline in support for the voice. And then he said he will legislate it if it fails. If the referendum fails, he'll legislate it. He's giving a big middle finger to all of us in Australia, every citizen in Australia. And that's the point. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Commission, ATSIC, was known to be corrupt, known to be hurting the Aboriginals on the ground, the people who need support and deserve support. That's why it was abolished. But it was abolished because it was created by legislation, and therefore another government came along and repealed that legislation. Took too long to do it because the corruption was clear. Took too long to do it. But nonetheless, they eventually plucked up the guts to do it. If the voice becomes enshrined in our Constitution, and the words are enshrined and entrenched in our Constitution, no one will be able to get rid of it. They will have another version of ATSIC, a corrupt organisation full of activists, lawyers, white and black, lawyers, activists, consultants, bureaucrats, politicians, all feeding off this trough that's ATSIC called by another name, the voice. So that's why it's so damaging to our country. It will hurt the Aboriginals. It will hurt the Aboriginals who really need the money. They'll be betrayed by this. These Aboriginal entities, there are 3,000 of these institutions around the country. They are actually crippling Aboriginals on the ground. Look, it's getting on. I've got to get to another function now, so I haven't been so much of a rush today, but thank you for listening in. It's always a pleasure, and we'll come up and see you again next week. Next week I'll be on the road on the Friday, so wherever we are, we'll stop off and pull over and connect. Thank you very much for listening. See you next week.